What if the system wasn't broken, but designed to work against you? A former MMA fighter, a corrupt cop, and a secret that could bring the whole police force crashing down. But when justice is just another game, how do you fight back? Stay tuned. This story is about to change everything. The autumn air carried a crisp chill, rustling through the trees lining the deserted paths of Powderhorn Park. The streetlights flickered dimly, casting long shadows over the fallen leaves scattered along the pavement. Jordan Carter pulled his hoodie tighter, shoving his hands into his pockets as he walked beside Apollo. His Doberman, the dog's ears perked up, alert as ever, scanning the surroundings with the same quiet vigilance Jordan had learned to trust. The park was never this empty. Even on a weeknight, there were usually joggers, dog walkers, or teenagers hanging around the benches, laughing too loudly. But tonight, silence wrapped around the area like a thick fog. Jordan glanced around, adjusting his pace. His instincts tingled. An old reflex honed from years in the cage, where reading body language meant survival. Something was off. He exhaled slowly, willing himself to stay calm. He wasn't a fighter anymore. That part of his life had ended the day he walked away from the octagon for good. Apollo suddenly stopped, his body tense, his head turned toward the far end of the park where a single vehicle sat idle, a police cruiser. The headlights were off, but the silhouette of the car was unmistakable under the glow of a nearby lamppost. Jordan's jaw tightened. He had seen enough of these situations to know when a cop was just passing through and when someone was waiting. This wasn't random. A moment passed. Then, the driver's door opened, and a man stepped out. Broad shoulders, stiff posture, and a slow, deliberate gait. The way he carried himself screamed authority. Authority that expected to be challenged. Sergeant Richard Kowalski. Jordan had seen the guy around before. A transfer from LAPD, rumored to have a reputation that followed him across state lines. The kind of cop who saw the world in black and white, where people like Jordan always landed on the wrong side of the equation. Kowalski adjusted his belt, his hand resting casually on his holster. "Carter," he called out, "we need to have a talk." Jordan slowed his steps but didn't stop. His pulse remained steady, his face unreadable. He knew how this went. A cop like Kowalski didn't stop a black man in a hoodie at night just to chat. Apollo let out a low growl. Kowalski smirked, stepping forward. "Your dog got a problem?" Jordan shook his head, keeping his voice calm. "He's just protective." "That so?" Kowalski's smirk widened, but his eyes remained cold. "Funny, I don't see much around here worth protecting." Jordan clenched his jaw but didn't take the bait. The old him might have fired back. But that was before he learned how quickly things could escalate. Before he learned that a cop's word always carried more weight than his own. "Is there a reason you stopped me, officer?" Jordan asked. Kowalski tilted his head slightly. "Just making sure everything's in order. Strange to see someone like you wandering around here this late." "Someone like me?" The sergeant's smile didn't reach his eyes. "You know what I mean." Jordan exhaled through his nose, gripping Apollo's leash tighter. He could feel the tension rising, the invisible line being drawn. He knew how these moments played out. A word too sharp, a movement too quick, and suddenly, he'd be the one on the ground. Apollo barking in distress while Kowalski stood over him, badge gleaming under the streetlights. So he did the only thing he could. He kept his voice even. "It's a public park." "Sure," Kowalski said, but the way he shifted his weight said otherwise. "But you understand why I had to check in, don't you? Gotta make sure no one's causing trouble." Jordan forced a smile. "Then I guess we're done here." He turned, pulling Apollo with him. His entire body was coiled tight, every muscle screaming at him to be ready. He didn't trust Kowalski to just let him walk away. But the sergeant didn't stop him. Instead, he let out a quiet chuckle. "You take care now, Carter." Jordan didn't respond. As he walked, he listened. Kowalski didn't follow him, not on foot, at least. But as he reached the edge of the park, he saw the headlights of the cruiser flick on. The car trailed behind him, slow and deliberate. Jordan didn't speed up. That's what they wanted, to see him react, to see him get nervous. Instead, he kept his pace steady, forcing his breaths to stay even. He knew better than to show any sign of unease. When he reached his street, The cruiser finally pulled to a stop at the intersection. The engine idled for a long moment before. Finally, the car made a slow U-turn and disappeared back into the night. Jordan exhaled, releasing a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. But something inside him whispered that it wasn't over. Apollo nudged his hand, sensing his unease. Jordan gave the dog a quick scratch behind the ear, murmuring a quiet reassurance. Then, as he stepped into his apartment, he froze. Through the living room window, parked just across the street, sat a black SUV. Not the police cruiser, something else. The windows were tinted too dark to see inside, but Jordan knew whoever was in there wasn't just passing through. He stood there for a moment, heart pounding in his chest. Then, as if sensing his gaze, the SUV's headlights blinked on. The vehicle slowly rolled forward, turned the corner, and vanished into the night. Jordan closed his eyes. It had begun. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp leaves as Jordan stepped onto the familiar path in Powderhorn Park. The golden foliage crunched under his sneakers, and Apollo trotted beside him, ears alert, tail swishing rhythmically. The park was quieter than usual, only a few joggers and an elderly woman walking a terrier. Despite the peaceful setting, something felt off. The tension from last night still lingered in Jordan's chest. The image of the black SUV, the slow roll of its tires before disappearing into the night, played on repeat in his mind. He inhaled deeply, exhaling through his nose. He had walked this route countless times. It was routine, familiar, but this morning, the feeling of being watched hadn't left him. A few yards ahead, near a wooden bench, a young woman adjusted the lens of a camera, positioning it toward the lake. She wore a light denim jacket over a hoodie, her brown hair pulled into a loose ponytail. Jordan recognized the focused look on her face, the same kind of concentration he had when analyzing an opponent before a fight. She angled her camera, stepping backward to frame her shot. When Apollo suddenly stiffened, his ears perked, head snapping toward the tree line. A low growl rumbled from his chest. Jordan followed the dog's gaze and saw a figure emerging from behind the trees. Richard Kowalski. The cop walked with a slow, deliberate stride, his uniform crisp, his eyes locked onto Jordan with a predatory gleam. Jordan clenched his jaw. He had hoped last night was an isolated incident, but deep down, he knew better. "Morning, Carter," Kowalski called out, voice dripping with something between amusement and challenge. Jordan kept his expression neutral. "Officer." Kowalski's smirk widened. "You're out early." Jordan held Apollo's leash a little tighter. "Just walking my dog." "Sure." The cop tilted his head slightly, as if assessing him. "Funny thing, I was just thinking about you." Jordan exhaled slowly. "That so?" Kowalski nodded, stopping a few feet away. His hand rested casually on his belt, just close enough to his holster to send a message. "I need to see some ID." Jordan let out a dry chuckle. "For what?" Kowalski shrugged. "Routine check." Jordan studied him. The officer wasn't even pretending to have a legitimate reason. "I don't have my wallet on me," Jordan said, his tone level. Kowalski took a slow step forward. "That's a problem." Jordan squared his shoulders. "You need probable cause to detain me." Kowalski's smirk didn't waver. "Maybe I got it." The tension crackled between them. Apollo let out another low growl. A few feet away, Lisa Brooks instinctively lifted her camera, angling the lens just slightly in their direction. She had been filming the lake. But now, this was something else. She hesitated, fingers tightening around the camera. Kowalski took another step forward, eyes narrowing. "Maybe someone called in a report about a suspicious individual. Maybe I got a tip. Or maybe," he trailed off, pretending to think. Then, he grinned. "Maybe you got a warrant you forgot about." Jordan's pulse hammered in his ears. He had seen this game before. "You're reaching," he said evenly. Kowalski's smirk faded slightly. "Or maybe I'm right." Lisa's heart pounded as she steadied her grip on the camera. She knew she should walk away, pretend she hadn't seen anything. But her gut told her this was wrong. She wasn't naive. She had seen the news. She had read about situations like this. But this was different. This was happening in front of her. Jordan's fists flexed at his sides. But he forced himself to stay still. Kowalski wanted a reaction. He wanted an excuse. Check your system, Jordan said. You won't find anything on me. Kowalski let the moment stretch before sighing dramatically. Guess I'll have to do a more thorough search. Lisa's breath caught in her throat as she heard those words. Jordan lifted his chin. You really want to go down this road? Kowalski tilted his head, studying him. Then, he smiled. You think you know how this works, Carter? His voice was quiet now, almost conversational. You think you can walk around like you're untouchable? Jordan didn't answer. Kowalski stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough for only Jordan to hear. You can't outrun this forever. I know what you did. Jordan's breath hitched, but his expression didn't waver. What the hell did he mean? Before Jordan could respond, Kowalski took a step back, clapped his hands together, and grinned. Well, looks like today's your lucky day. He turned on his heel and walked away, whistling as he strolled back toward his cruiser. Jordan didn't move until he was gone. His shoulders remained rigid, his hands curled into fists. Lisa hesitated, then slowly made her way toward him. Her voice was quiet, almost uncertain. I filmed everything. Jordan turned, looking at her for the first time. She swallowed. If you need proof, I have it. He held her gaze for a long moment before nodding. Lisa exhaled, not knowing that her small act of defiance had just set something much bigger in motion. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows over the streets of downtown Minneapolis. Traffic was steady but not congested, the kind of slow-moving rhythm that made it easy to spot when something wasn't right. Jordan gripped the steering wheel of his black Dodge Charger. His mind split between the road ahead and the unease brewing in his chest. The past 2 days had been quiet, too quiet. No run-ins with Kowalski. No strange cars parked outside his building. But silence didn't mean safety. It just meant something was coming. He glanced in the rearview mirror. The black SUV was there again. It had been tailing him since he left the gym, keeping just far enough back to seem inconspicuous, if he weren't paying attention. But Jordan was always paying attention. Years of training, years of stepping into a cage with opponents waiting for him to slip, had honed his instincts to something sharp, something undeniable. He flexed his fingers, keeping his grip loose. Maybe it was time to test them. At the next intersection, Jordan flicked on his signal, pretending to turn right. At the last second, he changed direction, merging back into the main road. The SUV followed. Jordan's jaw tightened. He was being hunted. A block ahead, a police cruiser was parked near the curb, its engine running. The moment Jordan saw it, the SUV made its move. It accelerated, cutting in front of him, then slammed the brakes. Jordan reacted on instinct. He yanked the wheel left, narrowly avoiding the bumper, but his car swerved into the adjacent lane. Tires screeched, horns blared, and then, the red and blue lights flashed behind him. Jordan exhaled slowly, forcing his pulse to stay even. He pulled to the side, hands gripping the wheel as the cruiser stopped behind him. He didn't need to look to know who would be stepping out. A door slammed shut, boots crunched against the pavement. And then, the familiar, grating voice. You're driving a little reckless there, Carter. Jordan stared straight ahead. Seconds later, Richard Kowalski appeared at the driver's side window, arms crossed, a smirk playing at his lips. Behind him, another officer, Blake, stood by the cruiser, watching with detached interest. Jordan rolled down his window. Something I can help you with, officer? Kowalski leaned down slightly, resting his forearm against the car. License and registration. Jordan didn't move. What's the probable cause? Kowalski let out a slow chuckle. I'd say nearly sideswiping another car is a good start. Jordan's knuckles widened on the wheel. I was avoiding the SUV that cut me off. Kowalski's grin widened. SUV? Didn't see one. Of course, he didn't. Jordan let out a controlled breath, then reached into the glove compartment, retrieving his documents. Kowalski took them, glancing at the ID. You still running that little gym? He mused. Must be hard to keep it afloat these days. You ever think about picking up some extra cash? Jordan ignored the bait. Kowalski sighed and straightened. Step out of the vehicle. Jordan frowned. For what? Kowalski gestured vaguely. Routine check. Jordan didn't move. You refusing? Kowalski asked, voice lower now, more dangerous. Jordan's pulse thrummed in his ears. He could refuse. He had every right to. But he knew where that would lead. Slowly, he pushed open the door and stepped out. Apollo let out a soft growl from inside, sensing the shift in his owner's demeanor. "Keep your dog in check," Kowalski muttered. Jordan ignored him. "What's next? You going to tell me I fit a description?" Kowalski's smile was all teeth. "Let's have a look inside, shall we?" Jordan's muscles coiled. "You don't have a warrant." Kowalski shrugged, turning to Blake. "That's funny. You smell that?" Blake stepped closer, playing along. "Yeah, smells like weed." Jordan's stomach turned. This was it. Kowalski gestured toward the car. "Better check, just in case." Jordan took a step forward. "This is illegal." Kowalski just smirked. Blake moved first, yanking open the driver's door, rifling through the glove compartment. He moved methodically, opening compartments, checking under the seats. Jordan stood still, every muscle locked in place. Then, Blake straightened, holding something between two fingers. A small plastic bag, white powder inside. Jordan's blood ran cold. Kowalski whistled. "Now, what do we have here?" Jordan took a sharp step forward. But Kowalski was already moving, shoving him against the car. "I don't know how that got there." Jordan snapped, rage bubbling under his skin. Kowalski chuckled. "That's what they all say." Jordan gritted his teeth. "You planted that." Kowalski leaned in, voice a whisper. "Prove it." The cuffs were on before Jordan could respond. By now, people had gathered. Phones were out, cameras rolling. Across the street, Lisa Brooks pushed her way through the onlookers, her own phone in hand. She tried to get closer, but another officer stepped in front of her, blocking her path. Jordan turned his head slightly, catching her eyes for a brief moment. She was filming. Kowalski noticed too. He straightened, his grip on Jordan's arm tightening for just a second before he yanked him toward the squad car. Jordan didn't resist. As they shoved him inside, his heart pounded, not just from anger, but from realization. This wasn't about him. This was bigger. As the car pulled away, he caught sight of the black SUV in the next lane. It was keeping pace with them, moving like a shadow. And then it hit him. Kowalski wasn't acting alone. The interrogation room smelled of stale coffee and old sweat, the air thick with the kind of tension that settled into places like this. Jordan sat in the metal chair, hands cuffed in front of him, his posture relaxed but his mind racing. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed faintly, casting a harsh white glow over the room's gray walls. He had been through enough fights to know when someone was trying to break him. And Kowalski? He was trying. The door swung open with a slow creak. Kowalski stepped in, closing it behind him with a casual ease, as if he were walking into his own office. He took his time pulling out the chair across from Jordan, his movements deliberate, controlled. A smirk played on his lips as he leaned forward. "You got anything you want to say before your lawyer shows up?" Jordan met his gaze, silent. Kowalski's smirk widened, but there was no humor in it. "Nothing? No explanation? No excuse?" He sighed, shaking his head. "That's disappointing. I thought you'd put up more of a fight." Jordan still said nothing. Kowalski leaned in, lowering his voice. "You think you can stand against us?" Jordan blinked once, slow and deliberate. "Us?" Kowalski chuckled, shaking his head like he was dealing with a naive child. "You don't get it yet. Do you? This isn't just about you. This is bigger. You think a few videos on the internet are going to save you?" Jordan's jaw tightened, but he kept his expression neutral. "You don't have a choice, Carter," Kowalski continued, his voice barely above a whisper now. "Take the fall for this. And maybe, just maybe, you'll make it out in one piece." Before Jordan could respond, the door swung open again. Ethan Carter strode in, his suit crisp, his FBI badge clipped to his belt. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes locked onto Kowalski with an intensity that made even the corrupt cop hesitate. "Step away from my brother," Ethan said, voice cool, controlled. Kowalski leaned back in his chair, smirking. "FBI moves fast. I guess I shouldn't be surprised." Ethan ignored the jab. "I want to see the warrant." Kowalski reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded document, sliding it across the table. Ethan picked it up, scanning it with the trained eye of a man who had spent years dealing with legal loopholes. He frowned. "This is incomplete," Ethan said, flipping the page. "There's no signed affidavit, no valid reason for a search. You have nothing." Kowalski's smirk faltered, just slightly. "You're mistaken, Agent," he said smoothly. "Carter was driving erratically. The drugs were found in his car. That's enough to hold him." Ethan set the paper down, unblinking. "No, it's not." Before Kowalski could respond, another figure entered the room. David Chen. The lawyer's sharp suit and confident stride made it clear he wasn't here to play games. He set a thick folder on the table, flipping it open. "Sergeant Kowalski," David said, his voice measured. "I assume you're familiar with the Fourth Amendment?" Kowalski exhaled sharply through his nose. "Save me the lecture." David ignored him, pulling out a printout. "This is a copy of a formal complaint filed against you 2 years ago in Los Angeles for illegal search and seizure. Different city, same tactics. And now, we have video evidence of what happened during this traffic stop. Video that will hold up in court." Kowalski didn't flinch, but the muscle in his jaw ticked. Ethan took a step closer, voice dangerously low. "You have no grounds to hold Jordan. If you try, you're putting the entire department under federal scrutiny." The room went silent. Then, with a slow exhale, Kowalski leaned back, tapping his fingers on the table. For the first time, his smirk faded completely. "Fine," he said, voice flat. "He can go." David closed his folder, tucking it under his arm. "Good choice." Jordan stood as Ethan unlocked the cuffs. He rolled his wrists, stretching them, but his eyes never left Kowalski. As they stepped toward the door, Kowalski spoke again, low enough that only Jordan could hear. "You got away this time," he murmured, "but you won't always have a lawyer and an FBI agent watching your back." Jordan turned slightly, just enough to meet his gaze. "We'll see." Ethan placed a firm hand on Jordan's shoulder, steering him out of the room. The cold night air hit them as they exited the precinct. Jordan inhaled deeply, trying to shake the weight of the last few hours. But before he could fully exhale, his phone buzzed. A text message. No name, no number, just a single line of text. "This isn't over. If you want the truth, meet me at Warehouse 12. Midnight." Jordan stared at the screen, his pulse steady. Something told him this was only the beginning. The rhythmic clank of metal weights echoed through the gym, blending with the muffled thud of fists meeting heavy bags. Jordan focused on his breathing, the steady rise and fall of his chest as he worked through his routine. The gym had always been his sanctuary, a place where nothing else mattered but the fight in front of him. But today, something felt wrong. His instincts prickled as he finished a set on the bench press. The usual sounds of the gym, the distant murmur of conversations, the whir of treadmills, the occasional grunt of someone pushing past their limit, were all there. But beneath it, a presence lingered. He sat up, wiping sweat from his forehead, and his eyes flicked toward the large glass windows facing the street. A man stood outside. He wasn't moving, wasn't looking at his phone or waiting for someone. He was just standing there, staring directly at Jordan through the glass. Jordan's grip on the towel in his hands tightened. The man was dressed in a plain black hoodie and jeans, his features obscured by the glare of the streetlights behind him. Jordan stood, muscles coiling with quiet tension, and started toward the front door. The moment he moved, the man turned. He walked briskly down the sidewalk, vanishing around the corner. Jordan pushed open the door, stepping onto the pavement. The cool evening air hit his skin, mixing with the lingering heat of his workout. His eyes scanned the street. A black SUV sat parked across the road. It was the same one. The same tinted windows, the same engine idling as if waiting for something, or someone. Jordan clenched his jaw. Whoever they weren't hiding anymore. A voice behind him snapped him out of his thoughts. "Jordan." He turned to see Lisa Brooks standing by the entrance to the gym. Her face pale, eyes darting nervously over her shoulder. He stepped back inside, closing the door behind them. "You okay?" Lisa shook her head. "No." Jordan led her toward the office, away from the lingering eyes of the gym members. Inside, she pulled out her phone, fingers trembling as she tapped the screen. She turned it toward him. On the screen was a photo of a crumpled note. its edges slightly burnt as if it had been set on fire before being put out. You want to live? Forget what you saw. Jordan exhaled slowly. When did you get this? Lisa swallowed. It was taped to my apartment door this morning. His mind worked through the implications. They had found her, and if they had found her, it meant they were watching everyone around him. Lisa's voice dropped to a whisper. They want me to delete the video. Jordan met her gaze. Did you? She hesitated, then shook her head. No. Good. But that meant she was in danger. Jordan ran a hand over his face. You need to be careful. Don't stay in one place too long. Don't go anywhere alone. Lisa nodded, but the fear in her eyes didn't fade. A sharp knock on the office door made them both jump. It was one of the gym staff. Peering in. Hey, Jordan, some guy's here asking for you. Says he's with the city inspector's office. Jordan exchanged a look with Lisa. This wasn't a coincidence. Tell him I'm busy, Jordan said, standing. The staff member nodded and left. Lisa shifted uncomfortably. What do we do? Jordan exhaled. We don't make it easy for them. Later that night, when Jordan returned to his apartment, the feeling of unease hadn't left him. If anything, it had grown heavier. As he stepped into the hallway of his building, he immediately noticed something was wrong. The door to his apartment was slightly open. His pulse kicked up. He took a slow step forward, pushing the door fully open with his fingertips. Inside, nothing was out of place. The furniture was where he left it. His kitchen counter was still cluttered with unopened mail. His jacket was draped over the chair just as he had left it. But he knew someone had been here. He moved cautiously through the space, scanning for anything out of place. His gaze landed on his desk. The laptop was on. He never left it on. Jordan took another step forward and tapped the touchpad. The screen flickered, revealing an open folder. All of his financial records, his personal emails, his travel history. They hadn't taken anything. They had been looking for something. His fingers clenched into fists. His phone buzzed. He pulled it out, seeing Ethan's name on the screen. He answered immediately. Ethan. His brother's voice was low. Urgent. Jordan. Get out of there. Now. Jordan didn't ask questions. What happened? Ethan's voice was clipped, like he was already moving. They just put out a warrant for you. Jordan's breath caught in his chest. For what? Ethan hesitated. Assault. Jordan felt his stomach drop. That's not possible. Ethan's voice was grim. A woman was attacked tonight. A witness says they saw you near the scene. Jordan's mind raced. He hadn't been anywhere but the gym and his apartment. They're setting you up, Ethan said. Jordan took one last look at his apartment. The open laptop, the untouched furniture, the barely ajar door. This wasn't just about intimidation anymore. They were making their move. The night air was thick, damp with the kind of tension that wrapped around Jordan's chest like a tightening noose. The city hummed in the distance. But here, in the abandoned parking lot on the edge of the industrial district, everything was still. A single street lamp flickered overhead, casting a pale glow on the cracked asphalt. Jordan stood near his car, eyes scanning the empty rows of faded parking lines. His phone buzzed in his hand. A blocked number. He answered. Are you alone? The voice was low, hoarse, like someone who had spent too many years whispering secrets in the dark. Jordan's grip tightened. Who is this? A pause. Then. Walk to the loading dock. And keep your hands where I can see them. Jordan exhaled, pocketing his phone. His gut told him this was a mistake. But his gut had also told him to run from a fight once. And that had cost him more than a match. He moved toward the rusted metal stairs leading to the warehouse's loading dock. A shadow detached itself from the darkness, stepping into the dim light. A man in a faded hoodie. The hood pulled low over his face. Jordan stopped a few feet away. You the one who sent the message? The man hesitated, then pulled the hood back. His face was worn, eyes sunken, like someone who hadn't slept in years. His cheek bore a faint scar, the kind that told a story but never gave away the ending. My name is Marcus Green, the man said, and if you want to live, you need to listen. Jordan didn't blink. Go on. Marcus glanced around before lowering his voice. I used to be a cop. 5 years in, I thought I could make a difference. But the deeper I went, the more I saw. The Brotherhood isn't just a rumor. Carter. It's real. Jordan's stomach clenched. I know that name, he said slowly. Marcus let out a bitter laugh. Of course you do. You've met their enforcer already. Jordan didn't have to ask. Kowalski. Marcus nodded. And he's just a piece of the puzzle. They run the city from the inside out. Dirty cops. Judges in their pockets. Politicians who look the other way. They decide who gets locked up, who walks free, and when someone becomes a problem. He let the sentence hang. Jordan crossed his arms. You're telling me they're framing me because I'm a problem? Marcus's gaze was steady. You didn't just piss off Kowalski. You got caught in something bigger. They don't like attention. And thanks to that video, you're a loose end. Jordan's jaw clenched. So what happens next? Marcus took a step closer. I have proof. Files. Records. Things that could bury them. Where? In the police archives. Storage locker 218. Jordan narrowed his eyes. And you haven't used this already because? Because if I walk into that building, I'm dead before I reach the front desk. Jordan exhaled through his nose. So why risk coming to me? Marcus opened his mouth, then froze. A sharp crack split the air. Gunfire. Jordan barely had time to react before Marcus collapsed. Blood blooming across his chest. Jordan lunged forward, catching the man as he fell. Footsteps pounded against the pavement. Headlights flared to life, cutting through the darkness as a black SUV roared into view. Jordan swore under his breath. Marcus's breath hitched. His fingers clenched weakly around Jordan's wrist. He tried to speak. Jordan leaned in. Locker 218. The SUV's doors slammed open. Jordan moved on instinct. He shoved Marcus behind a stack of wooden pallets, rolling for cover just as another round of gunfire shredded the air. His pulse thundered in his ears. He needed to run. But Marcus. He turned back. The man's body was still. His eyes stared past Jordan, unblinking. Too late. Jordan's teeth clenched. A shadow moved near the SUV. The shooter stepped forward, his face briefly illuminated by the street lamp. Jordan's breath caught. Blake. The same officer who had planted the drugs in his car. Blake's gaze swept the lot, searching for movement. Jordan forced himself to stay still. A voice called out from the SUV. We got what we needed. Leave him. Blake hesitated, then lowered his gun. The SUV's tires screeched as it peeled away, vanishing into the night. Jordan stayed crouched for a long moment, his breath shallow. Then, slowly, he stood, his fists clenched. They had just made a mistake. Because now, he had a name, and he wasn't going to run. The air was thick with the scent of damp asphalt and garbage. The kind of staleness that clung to abandoned places. Jordan crouched low behind a rusted dumpster, chest rising and falling in measured breaths. The distant roar of an engine echoed through the alley, headlights sweeping across the brick walls. They were looking for him. He had barely escaped the parking lot, his pulse still hammering from the gunfire, from Marcus bleeding out in his arms. His mind was a battlefield of questions and rage. Who else was involved? How far did this go? He pressed his back against the cold metal, forcing himself to think. He had to move. The alley wouldn't hide him forever. The SUV slowed at the entrance, its engine idling. A voice carried through the night. Spread out. He's here somewhere. Jordan clenched his jaw. They weren't leaving without a body. He scanned his surroundings. A rusted fire escape clung to the side of an old brick building, its ladder hanging just out of reach. He calculated the jump. One shot. He lunged forward, kicking off the dumpster, fingers grasping the cold steel just as the first set of boots entered the alley. The metal groaned under his weight as he hauled himself up, the ladder swaying dangerously before locking into place. A voice barked below. There, on the fire escape. Jordan didn't look back. He climbed, 2 steps at a time, his muscles burning from the effort. A gunshot rang out, sparks flying off the railing as the bullet missed by inches. He reached the second-floor landing and yanked open a shattered window, slipping inside just as more shots rang out. The building was dark, dust motes swirling in the faint light from the street. He moved quickly, navigating the skeletal remains of what once had been an office. Papers littered the floor, desks overturned, graffiti staining the walls. Footsteps echoed from below. They were coming in. Jordan ducked behind a half-collapsed cubicle. His breath slow, steady. He needed a plan. The exits were limited. If they boxed him in, it was over. A creak came from the stairwell. Then a voice. Come on, Carter. Let's not make this harder than it has to be. Blake. Jordan's fingers curled into fists. He could hear the officer's slow, deliberate steps. Blake wasn't rushing. He thought he had already won. You know, Blake called out, his voice bouncing off the empty space. Kowalski wanted me to kill you back in the parking lot. But I told him no. Jordan remained silent, muscles tensed. Blake chuckled. Not because I wanted to spare you. I just wanted to do it myself. Jordan exhaled slowly. Blake took another step. You can't run forever. Man, you think you're exposing something new? This city has been like this for decades. Cops like me, we don't follow the rules. We make them. Jordan shifted slightly, positioning himself near a fallen filing cabinet. He could see the outline of Blake now, his silhouette against the weak glow of the moon filtering through a broken skylight. Blake sighed, his gun still raised. Tell you what, you give yourself up now. And maybe, just maybe, I'll make it quick. Jordan launched forward. Blake barely had time to react before Jordan closed the distance, his fist slamming into the officer's ribs. Blake staggered, the wind knocked out of him. But he recovered fast, swinging his pistol toward Jordan's head. Jordan ducked, grabbed Blake's wrist, and twisted. The gun clattered to the floor. Blake threw a wild punch. Jordan blocked it, countering with a sharp elbow to the jaw. The officer grunted, stumbling back. They circled each other in the dim light. Breath heavy, muscles coiled. Blake smirked, blood dripping from his lip. You hit like a cop. Guess that makes sense. You used to be one of us. Didn't you? Jordan didn't take the bait. He feinted left, then drove a knee into Blake's stomach. The officer doubled over, wheezing. Jordan seized the moment. He grabbed Blake's collar and slammed him against the nearest wall. Blake grinned through the pain. Go ahead, kill me. See how fast they turn you into the bad guy. Jordan's grip tightened. Who else is involved? Blake spat blood onto the floor. You think taking me down changes anything? The Brotherhood doesn't end with Kowalski. It sure as hell doesn't end with me. Jordan's knuckles ached. He wanted to keep hitting him. Wanted to crack that smug face until he got the answers he needed. But that's what they wanted. He forced himself to step back, breathing hard. Blake chuckled, his head lolling against the wall. You'll never make it out of this. Carter, they've already decided. You're guilty. The only question is how long you last before they put you in the ground. Jordan didn't respond. He bent down, snatching Blake's phone from his belt. The screen was cracked, but still functional. A text had just come through from an unknown number. Clean up the parking lot. If needed, eliminate Carter. Jordan's stomach twisted. This wasn't just a rogue cop with a vendetta. This was bigger. He pocketed the phone and turned away. Blake groaned from the floor. You run now. You're only making it worse. Jordan glanced back. We'll see. He slipped through the nearest exit, disappearing into the night. The city was silent at this hour. The streets nearly deserted. A mist clung to the asphalt, rolling in from the river like a ghostly curtain. Jordan stood in the shadows across from the Minneapolis Police Department headquarters. His hoodie pulled low, his breathing steady. This was insane. Breaking into a police station wasn't just reckless, it was suicidal. But after everything that had happened, after Marcus's death, after the setup that had nearly landed him in prison, Jordan knew there was no turning back. The only way to survive was to expose the truth before they buried him for good. His phone vibrated in his pocket. Ethan. He pressed it to his ear. Tell me you're not actually doing this. His brother's voice came, low and sharp. Jordan scanned the street, keeping to the shadows. I don't have a choice. Ethan cursed under his breath. Jordan, listen to me. If they catch you, they won't just arrest you. They'll make you disappear. Jordan's fingers curled into a fist. Then I better not get caught. A pause. Then, Ethan exhaled sharply. Chen sent you the building schematics. Check your messages. Jordan unlocked his phone. A detailed map of the police station's interior flashed on his screen. Security cameras cover all entrances. Ethan continued. But the south exit, near the parking garage, has a blind spot. If you time it right, You can get inside before the next patrol circles around. Jordan glanced across the street. The entrance was quiet, save for a single patrol car parked out front. He took a slow breath. Keep them busy. Ethan hesitated. You sure about this? Jordan's jaw tightened. I don't have time to be unsure. Silence. Then Ethan sighed. Fine. I'll make some calls. But get in and get out. No heroics. The call ended. Jordan pulled his hoodie tighter and moved. He crossed the street in quick, measured steps, staying low as he approached the building's rear entrance. The heavy metal door was locked. But as Chen had suspected, it hadn't been properly secured. The electronic panel flashed red, but with a careful tug, the door gave way just enough for him to slip through. Inside, the hallway was dimly lit. The air smelled of stale coffee and old paper. The quiet hum of computers filling the space. Jordan moved quickly, his footsteps light against the tile floor. The records archive was in the basement. He had 5 minutes, maybe less. The stairs creaked beneath his weight as he descended. Muscles tensed for any sign of movement. The hallway below was lined with metal filing cabinets. Stacks of old case files piled against the walls. A faint buzzing sound filled the air. A flickering fluorescent light overhead. Trophy cases lined the far wall, filled with old photos of officers, commendations, plaques, names etched in brass. He didn't stop. Locker 218. That's what Marcus had said. Jordan scanned the room, heart pounding as he spotted the row of lockers at the back. He moved swiftly, running his fingers over the numbered plates until he found it. The lock was old, rusted around the edges. He grabbed a letter opener from a nearby desk and wedged it into the gap. Twisting, the lock snapped with a quiet crack. Jordan pulled the door open. Inside, sitting on the metal shelf, was a worn leather notebook. He grabbed it and flipped through the pages. Names, dates, transactions, bribes, payoffs, and at the center of it all, Kowalski. A door creaked. Jordan stiffened. A shadow stretched across the floor. He turned slowly, pulse hammering. Lieutenant Danny Wells stood in the doorway. Jordan knew the name. Wells had a reputation for being one of the few good cops left. But right now, his hand was resting near his gun. Jordan kept his voice even. I don't want trouble. Wells didn't move. His eyes flicked to the notebook in Jordan's hands. You found it, Wells said quietly. Jordan watched him carefully. You knew? Wells exhaled, closing his eyes for a moment. I knew there was something dirty going on, but I didn't know how deep it went. Jordan tightened his grip on the notebook. Are you going to stop me? A long silence stretched between them. Then, slowly, Wells lowered his hand from his holster. Go, he said, before I change my mind. Jordan hesitated. Why are you letting me walk? Wells' jaw clenched. Because I still believe in the job. And if that notebook has what I think it does, maybe there's still a chance to clean this mess up. Jordan didn't wait. He turned and moved toward the exit. As he disappeared into the stairwell, Wells pulled out his phone and dialed a number. The line clicked. He has the notebook, Wells said. A low, gravelly voice responded. Follow him. We need to know his next move. Wells' grip tightened on the phone. Understood. The motel room smelled of stale cigarettes and cheap air freshener. The kind that did nothing to mask the years of nicotine clinging to the walls. Jordan sat on the edge of the bed, the dim morning light filtering through the cracked blinds, casting long, jagged shadows across the room. He had barely slept. The leather notebook rested on the nightstand, its worn pages filled with secrets that could tear the city apart. It wasn't just names. It was dates, payments, locations. He flipped through it again. The scrawled handwriting of Marcus Green mapping out years of corruption. And there it was. Not just Kowalski. Not just a handful of dirty cops. Judges. District attorneys. Even a sitting councilman. Jordan exhaled slowly, his fingers tightening around the edges of the notebook. This wasn't just about him anymore. This wasn't just about clearing his name. This was about exposing a system built to protect its own, no matter the cost. His phone vibrated on the nightstand. Ethan. Jordan picked up. I have it, he said, skipping any greeting. Ethan's voice was tense. Meet me at Darby's Cafe. 20 minutes. Jordan nodded, already on his feet. I'll be there. The cafe was small, tucked away from the main streets. The kind of place that never made the news and never had a full house. That made it safer, at least in theory. Ethan was already there when Jordan arrived, sitting in a booth against the far wall. He wasn't alone. David Shen sat across from him, a cup of untouched coffee in front of him. The lawyer's expression was grim, his fingers tapping against the table in a slow, deliberate rhythm. Jordan slid into the seat next to his brother, setting the notebook down. David opened it, flipping through the pages, his eyes scanning the words. His fingers stopped on a particular entry. His breath hitched. "Jesus Christ," he muttered. Jordan leaned in. "What?" David swallowed, his face pale. "There's a name in here. Richard Farrow." Ethan's head snapped up. "Judge Farrow?" David nodded. "If he's in this, if they have a judge in their pocket. They don't just control the cops. They control the courts." Jordan sat back, the weight of it pressing against his ribs. Ethan rubbed his temples. "This isn't just a few bad cops shaking down drug dealers. This is infrastructure. This is a machine." David closed the notebook. "If we release this, we're not just putting Kowalski away. We're blowing up the entire system." Jordan looked between them. "Then we do it." David sighed, shaking his head. "It's not that simple." Ethan leaned forward, voice low. "The moment this goes public, they'll know it's us. They'll come after you, Jordan. And after that, they'll come after everyone you've ever spoken to." Jordan's jaw clenched. "They already are." He motioned toward the window with a small nod. Ethan turned slightly. On the corner, standing near a lamppost, was Lieutenant Danny Wells. He wasn't making a move. He was just watching. Ethan's voice was tight. "He let you walk last night. Now he's tracking you?" Jordan's fingers tapped against the table. "Could be a warning. Could be something worse." David exhaled. "We need to go. Now." Jordan didn't argue. As they stepped out of the cafe, his phone buzzed again. A text. No name. No number. Just a single line. "If you think you'll survive this, you're already dead." Jordan felt the burn of anger in his chest. They weren't just trying to stop him. They were hunting him. The air inside the warehouse was thick with dust, the wooden beams overhead groaning with the weight of years of neglect. A single overhead bulb flickered, casting long shadows across the metal table where Jordan, Ethan, and David sat. The notebook, the thing that could bring an entire system crashing down, lay open in front of them. Sarah Mitchell sat across from them, her laptop open, a small recording device blinking red beside it. She was sharp-eyed, the type of journalist who had spent her career digging into corruption and exposing the truth. She adjusted her glasses, glancing between them. "You understand what this means, don't you?" Her voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. Jordan nodded. "We do." David leaned forward, his shoulder wrapped in fresh gauze from the wound he'd taken earlier. "This isn't just about Kowalski. This is bigger. The Brotherhood controls the police, the courts, and the city council. If we get this out there, if people see what's in that book, it'll be impossible to cover up." Sarah tapped her fingers against the table. "And you trust me to handle this?" Ethan met her gaze. "We've done our homework. You don't back down from stories like this." She studied them for a long moment, then exhaled. "All right, let's get started." Jordan pushed the notebook toward her. "Everything you need is in there. Dates, names, transactions, even murders that were covered up." Sarah flipped through the pages, her face hardening as she read. She muttered, "Jesus." For the first time in days, Jordan felt something close to hope. Then Ethan stiffened. Something was wrong. He didn't say anything, but his posture shifted. His eyes flicked toward the boarded-up window to his left. Jordan followed his gaze. A shadow moved outside. "Wrap it up," Ethan said quietly, his voice tight. Sarah hesitated, but before she could close her laptop, the first gunshot shattered the window. Glass exploded, shards raining down as Sarah ducked, shielding her laptop with her arms. Jordan grabbed her and pulled her down behind the table. "Move," Ethan shouted, drawing his Glock as the warehouse doors burst open. 4 figures in dark tactical gear poured in, weapons raised. The muzzle flashes lit up the room as gunfire ripped through the air. David cried out, clutching his shoulder as a bullet grazed him. Jordan yanked Sarah toward the back exit, shielding her as bullets tore into the metal shelves around them. Ethan returned fire, his shots precise, forcing the attackers to take cover behind stacks of crates. We have to go, now. Jordan grabbed a metal rack and shoved it over, sending a cascade of tools and equipment tumbling to the floor, creating a temporary barrier. Get David out of here. Ethan hauled David to his feet, dragging him toward the exit. But Sarah wasn't moving. She was on the ground, her leg slick with blood. Jordan turned back, grabbing her under the arms. Come on, she gasped, pain contorting her face. I can't. A bullet struck inches from Jordan's hand, sending splinters flying. The shooters were closing in. Sarah looked at him, her breathing ragged. You have to go. Jordan shook his head. No, we all get out. Her fingers curled around his wrist, her grip surprisingly strong despite the blood loss. If you die here, she said through gritted teeth, no one will ever know the truth. Jordan hesitated. Then he heard Ethan's voice, distant but urgent. Jordan. Another bullet zipped past. Sarah forced a weak smile. Go. Jordan clenched his jaw, then made the hardest decision of his life. He ran. Ethan's car was already rolling as Jordan leapt into the backseat. Tires screeched against the pavement as they sped away. Through the smoke and chaos, Jordan twisted in his seat. Looking back, the warehouse was burning. Flames curled into the night sky, swallowing everything inside. And standing in front of it, silhouetted against the inferno, was Kowalski, smiling. The blinds were drawn, the room dimly lit by the glow of a cheap table lamp. The air inside the safe house was thick with tension. Jordan sat on the edge of a worn-out couch, his jaw clenched as he watched the muted television screen. His own face stared back at him. A breaking news banner scrolled across the bottom of the broadcast. Minneapolis police have issued a nationwide manhunt for Jordan Carter, the prime suspect in the brutal murder of investigative journalist Sarah Mitchell. Authorities urge the public to report any sightings immediately. Carter is considered armed and extremely dangerous. The words hit harder than any punch Jordan had ever taken in the cage. The footage switched to a press conference outside the police station. Kowalski stood at the podium, his uniform crisp, his expression solemn. He played the role perfectly, concerned, authoritative, outraged. We will not rest until this man is brought to justice, Kowalski said, his voice grave. Sarah Mitchell was a respected journalist, and her death will not go unanswered. Carter is a fugitive. If you see him, do not approach. Call law enforcement immediately. Jordan exhaled slowly, his fingers tightening into fists. Ethan, standing near the small kitchen, grabbed the remote and shut off the TV with a sharp click. This is worse than I thought, he muttered, pacing. They've got the media eating out of their hands. Every cop in the city is gonna be gunning for you. Jordan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. They're not just after me. They want to make sure the truth dies with me. David Chen, still weak from his gunshot wound, shifted slightly in the chair by the window. And if they control the narrative, they control the outcome, he said, his voice strained but steady. Ethan's phone buzzed on the counter. He glanced at the screen, his brow furrowing. Something's not right, he said as he answered. Yeah? A muffled voice on the other end. Ethan listened, his face darkening. Say that again, he demanded, his grip tightening on the phone. Jordan and David exchanged a look. Ethan ended the call, his expression unreadable. That was one of my guys in the bureau, he said. He told me there's a directive from higher ups. FBI has been ordered to stay out of your case. Jordan frowned. What does that mean? Ethan tossed his phone onto the counter. It means this isn't just Kowalski. Someone high up is pulling the strings. They don't want us interfering. David let out a slow breath. So they've got the police, the courts, and now, they've got enough pull to shut down an FBI investigation. He looked up at Jordan. We're not just fighting the Brotherhood. We're fighting a system that's protected itself for years. Jordan nodded, the weight of it sinking in. Then we need to hit them where it hurts. Ethan scoffed. And where exactly would that be? David reached for his laptop, wincing as his injured shoulder protested. I might have something. He pulled up a document and turned the screen toward them. Before Marcus Green was killed, he didn't just keep his notes in that book. David explained. He sent a copy to someone, a lawyer who used to work on police corruption cases. Ethan crossed his arms. And let me guess, Kowalski knows. David nodded. If he gets to that lawyer first. The last piece of evidence tying them to this dies. Jordan straightened. Where is he? David hesitated, then tapped a message on the screen. A text had come through on an encrypted channel. If you want the copy, meet me at Warehouse 17 on 5th Street. Come alone. Jordan stared at the words. Ethan cursed. It's a trap. Maybe, Jordan said, but it's the only lead we've got. David looked between them. You don't have to do this. If they set you up. Jordan shook his head. They already have. Ethan exhaled sharply. Then we do this smart. No going in blind. Jordan met his brother's gaze. Then let's get to work. The wind howled through the abandoned warehouse district, carrying the scent of rust and damp concrete. Jordan moved cautiously toward Warehouse 17, his senses on high alert. The place was eerily quiet, save for the flickering street lamp casting elongated shadows along the cracked pavement. He knew this was a risk. A trap was likely waiting for him. But if there was even a sliver of truth to the message, if the lawyer did have a copy of Marcus Green's ledger, then he had to take the chance. Jordan stepped inside. The warehouse was massive, its steel beams stretching into darkness above. A few dim bulbs flickered overhead, casting a weak yellow glow. A lone figure stood near the center of the room, partially obscured by shadows. Jordan took a slow breath. Are you the one who has the ledger? The man didn't move at first. Then, stepping into the light, he pulled back his hood. Lieutenant Danny Wells. Jordan's stomach turned. Wells had let him go before, had even hinted at being on the fence about the Brotherhood. But now, the look in his eyes was different. Cold, calculated. A gun rested easily in his hand. Jordan's muscles tensed. You shouldn't have come here, Wells said. His voice was steady, almost regretful. You should have run while you had the chance. Jordan clenched his fists. You working for them now? Or were you always on their side? Wells exhaled, shaking his head. Does it matter? Behind him, the sound of a metal door sliding open echoed through the warehouse. A slow, deliberate clap followed. Then, Richard Kowalski stepped inside. The smug bastard walked in like he owned the place. 2 officers flanking him. His uniform was crisp, but his smile was filthy with arrogance. Jordan didn't flinch. You really just don't know when to quit, do you? Kowalski said, tilting his head. You could have disappeared quietly, but no, you had to keep digging. Jordan's eyes flicked to the gun at Wells' side. What's your play here, Kowalski? Frame me again? Or just put a bullet in my head and be done with it? Kowalski chuckled. Oh, Carter, this isn't just about you anymore. He took a step closer. It's about Ethan. Jordan's stomach dropped. What the hell are you talking about? Kowalski's smirk widened. You really think your brother's the hero you believe he is? He let the words hang, enjoying the moment. Marcus didn't die just because of that notebook. He died because he knew the truth about Ethan. Jordan's pulse pounded in his ears. You're lying. Kowalski shrugged. Am I? The room was suffocating. Wells shifted slightly, his grip tightening on his gun. Think about it, Kowalski continued. Who in the FBI had the authority to keep this operation buried for years? Who had the connections to make sure no one ever got too close? He took another step forward. And why do you think the Brotherhood never touched you until now? Because they knew you were Ethan Carter's brother. And Ethan, he chuckled. Well, he's been very useful to us. Jordan's breath was slow, controlled, but the rage building inside him was anything but. Shut up. Kowalski grinned. Face it, Carter, your own brother isn't as clean as you think. A gunshot exploded through the warehouse. Not from Kowalski, not from Wells, but from outside. Ethan. Chaos erupted. Bullets tore through crates and metal beams as Ethan's shots rang out from the rafters. Jordan dove behind a stack of wooden pallets, grabbing a metal pipe from the floor. The 2 officers flanking Kowalski scrambled for cover. Wells ducked but hesitated. Jordan seized the moment. He lunged forward, swinging the pipe. It connected with Wells' wrist, knocking the gun loose. Wells swore, stumbling back as Jordan grabbed him by the collar and slammed him into a support beam. Tell me the truth, Jordan demanded. What the hell does Kowalski mean about Ethan? Wells grimaced, but Jordan saw it. The flicker of doubt in his eyes. Before he could answer, Kowalski's voice cut through the noise. Shoot him. Wells hesitated, and that hesitation was all Jordan needed. He threw a brutal punch, sending Wells sprawling. Then, another gunshot, and this time, it hit its mark. Ethan. Jordan whipped around in time to see his brother stagger. His hand pressed against his stomach. Blood seeped through his shirt. Ethan. Jordan bolted forward as Ethan collapsed against a metal crate. He caught him before he hit the ground, his heart slamming against his ribs. Kowalski lowered his smoking gun, shaking his head. Told you, Carter, this doesn't end with you. Jordan felt Ethan's grip on his arm tighten. His brother's voice was weak, barely above a whisper. Jordan, I'm sorry. Jordan shook his head. No, don't do this. Stay with me. Ethan's breath was shallow. There's more you need to know. His fingers dug into Jordan's sleeve. You have to finish this. Jordan's chest tightened. I'm not doing this without you. Ethan managed the faintest smile. You don't have a choice. More sirens in the distance. Backup was coming. Jordan's vision blurred with rage, with grief. He looked up. Kowalski was gone. The bastard had disappeared into the shadows. But this wasn't over. Not even close. Jordan tightened his grip on Ethan and pulled him to his feet. They had to get out. Had to regroup. Had to finish this. The warehouse smelled of rust and old oil, its metal walls groaning under the weight of the night wind. Jordan crouched beside Ethan, pressing down on the gunshot wound just below his brother's ribs. His hands were slick with blood. Ethan groaned, his face pale, sweat pooling along his brow. Stay with me, Jordan muttered, ripping a strip from his already torn hoodie and wrapping it around Ethan's waist. Ethan's breathing was shallow, his eyes fluttering open just long enough to give Jordan a tired smirk. You always were the bossy one. Jordan's jaw tightened, his mind was racing, but not just because Ethan was dying in his arms. It was because of what Kowalski had said back at the warehouse. You really think your brother's the hero you believe he is? Jordan hadn't let it sink in before. He had been too busy keeping them alive. But now, sitting in this abandoned warehouse with nothing but silence around them, the weight of those words pressed down on him. He had to ask. Jordan grabbed Ethan's shoulder, shaking him slightly. Tell me the truth. Ethan's eyelids flickered. What? Jordan's grip tightened. Did you work with them? Ethan's face darkened. He exhaled slowly, wincing as the pain from his wound flared up. It's not that simple. Jordan reached into his pocket and pulled out Kowalski's phone. He had taken it during the fight, and now the screen was lit up with a photo. A grainy image of Ethan standing alongside a group of men in uniform. Kowalski was there, so was Police Chief Kevin Reynolds. Ethan stared at the image, his expression unreadable. Jordan's voice was steel. What the hell is this? Ethan swallowed hard. That was a long time ago. That's not an answer. Ethan coughed, struggling to sit up. I didn't work for them. But yeah, I protected them once. His voice was hoarse, his body trembling from blood loss. Years ago, there was an investigation into Kowalski. Some higher-ups in the bureau wanted to take him down for corruption. I stopped it. Jordan felt like he'd been punched in the gut. You what? Ethan looked away. I thought I was doing the right thing. At the time, I believed exposing cops like Kowalski would tear the department apart. That it would weaken law enforcement when we needed it strong. Jordan stood up abruptly, pacing the length of the warehouse. So you helped them? Ethan's gaze snapped up. I was wrong. His voice cracked. I realized too late that by protecting them, I wasn't keeping law enforcement strong. I was letting it rot from the inside. Jordan ran a hand over his face, trying to process. And that's why they're after you now? Because you turned against them? Ethan gave a weak nod. Yeah. Jordan wanted to be furious. He wanted to punch something, to yell, to do anything but feel the crushing disappointment in his chest. Instead, he crouched back down. I should let you bleed out for this, he muttered. Ethan chuckled weakly. Wouldn't blame you. Jordan shook his head. But you're my brother. He tightened the makeshift bandage. And we still have work to do. A vibration cut through the silence. David Chen's name flashed across Jordan's phone. He answered. Yeah? David's voice was tense. I've secured a place for Ethan. A private clinic. No records. No questions. Jordan glanced down at his brother. Ethan needed real medical attention. Fast. Where? David rattled off an address. But Jordan, I found something else. Jordan's stomach turned. What? There was hesitation on the line. Then. Turn on the news. Jordan fumbled for the remote. The old TV against the wall crackled to life. A news anchor appeared, her expression solemn. In breaking news tonight, Officer Richard Kowalski has been officially promoted to Deputy Chief of the Minneapolis Police Department. The controversial figure, known for his tough stance on crime, will now oversee major citywide operations. Jordan felt a chill crawl up his spine. Kowalski hadn't just survived, he had won. 2 days had passed since Ethan's confession. The weight of his words still clung to Jordan like a second skin. Refusing to let go, they had spent the past 48 hours in a cold, dimly lit warehouse, going over every detail of their next move. A single exposed bulb buzzed overhead, casting a sickly glow over the scattered documents, newspaper clippings, and a laptop playing the latest news on Kowalski's upcoming press conference. Jordan leaned forward, his elbows resting on the makeshift table. We're running out of time. David Chen rubbed his temple. If we make a mistake, Kowalski doesn't just walk away, he buries us. Jordan exhaled, his fingers tapping the edge of the table. He knew the risks, but after everything, there was no turning back. We need someone inside, David continued, someone in the department willing to testify. Without that, even if we dump everything on the internet, it can be dismissed as a smear campaign. Jordan's jaw tightened. He already had someone in mind. Danny Wells. The man had let him walk away once. But could he be trusted now? Jordan didn't have a choice. A dangerous proposition. That night, Jordan waited in the shadows of a parking garage, hands in his jacket pockets, watching as a black sedan pulled into a dimly lit space. The door opened, and Lieutenant Danny Wells stepped out. Jordan could tell Wells was nervous, his movements stiff, his eyes darting around the garage like he expected Kowalski's goons to come bursting in at any moment. Jordan didn't waste time. He pulled out his phone, tapped the screen, and played a recording. A grainy voice filled the air. I don't care what he knows. You handle him, or I'll handle you. Wells flinched. Where the hell did you get that? Jordan took a step forward. Marcus Green recorded it before he died. It's Kowalski threatening you. That's enough to prove you were working under duress. Wells shook his head. It's not that simple. You think a recording will keep me alive? Kowalski's got people everywhere. Then help us take him down. Wells let out a bitter laugh. You think he's the only one? Even if you take him out, someone else will take his place. Jordan squared his shoulders. Maybe, but this is where we start. Wells exhaled, looking down at the ground. His fingers twitched like he was debating whether to run or fight. Then, finally, he nodded, exposing the truth. With Wells on their side, David and Ethan wasted no time pushing the information into the right hands. News anchors across the city were blindsided when a breaking story interrupted their broadcasts. Documents leaked to our newsroom expose a deeply rooted corruption scandal within the Minneapolis Police Department. High-ranking officers, including newly appointed Deputy Chief Richard Kowalski, are implicated in bribery, witness tampering, and even orchestrated murders. Chaos erupted. The department was thrown into turmoil. Officers who had once stood shoulder to shoulder now eyed each other with suspicion. And then came the press conference. Kowalski's fall. Kowalski stepped onto the stage with the confidence of a man who had survived worse. He adjusted the microphone, clearing his throat, ready to spin the situation in his favor. Then, the doors at the back of the room slammed open. Federal agents poured in. Cameras turned away from Kowalski to capture the scene. And then, Wells stepped forward. Deputy Chief Kowalski has been running a criminal enterprise within this department for years. Wells declared, voice steady, gaze locked on the cameras. I was forced to participate under duress. But tonight, I'm here to tell the truth. Kowalski's face drained of color. For the first time, he looked afraid. His hand twitched toward his belt, toward his gun. Before he could reach it, a red dot appeared on his chest. Then another. Tisk, tisk, a federal agent muttered, stepping forward. Don't do anything stupid, Kowalski. With no other option, Kowalski raised his hands as the agents swarmed him. He turned his head just enough to lock eyes with Jordan. Even as he was cuffed, his lips curled into a smirk. "You think this changes anything?" he whispered. "You can't kill a system." Jordan took a slow breath, stepping forward until they were only inches apart. "Then I'll burn it down." Kowalski's smirk finally faltered. A week had passed since Kowalski's arrest. But the storm hadn't settled. If anything, it had only just begun. Jordan sat in David Chen's office, surrounded by stacks of legal documents, newspaper clippings, and a laptop screen that flashed headlines in real time. Minneapolis police scandal. How deep does the corruption go? Federal investigation launched into widespread misconduct in law enforcement. Hero or fugitive? The man who took on the system. Jordan let out a slow breath, rubbing his temples. He should have felt some kind of relief. After all, Kowalski was in custody. The public was outraged, and change was finally on the horizon. But something inside him wouldn't let go of the nagging feeling that this wasn't over. "You're thinking the same thing I am," David muttered, flipping through a stack of financial statements. Jordan looked up. "That Kowalski was just a pawn?" David nodded, tapping his pen against the paper. "There are names missing, transactions that don't add up. Someone above him was pulling the strings. And they're still out there." Jordan exhaled. "Then we're not done. Ethan's reckoning." Across town, Ethan sat in a sterile, windowless room at the FBI headquarters. The air was thick with unspoken judgment as his superior, Assistant Director Grant, flipped through a thick file. "Ethan Carter," Grant finally said, adjusting his glasses. "Decorated agent, numerous commendations, a record of exceptional service." Then, he shut the file with a loud thud. "And yet, you withheld information on an active criminal conspiracy, obstructed an internal investigation, and, by your own admission, helped a known corrupt officer escape justice years ago." Ethan swallowed hard. "I thought I was protecting the agency." Grant leaned back. "And look where that got you." A long silence stretched between them before Grant finally spoke again. "As of now, you're suspended indefinitely, pending further review." Ethan barely nodded. He had expected this. When he stepped out of the building, Jordan was waiting. "You don't have to say it," Ethan muttered, running a hand through his hair. Jordan didn't. He just studied his brother for a long moment before speaking. "You made mistakes," he said, "but you tried to fix them. Not everyone gets that chance." Ethan looked away, guilt flickering across his face. Jordan continued, softer this time. "Now you just have to figure out what kind of man you want to be. The real power." That evening, David dug deeper into the files left behind by Marcus Green. One document caught his attention, a bank transfer, large enough to make his stomach turn. It wasn't from Kowalski. It was to him. A judge. A federal judge. David's heart pounded as he traced the transaction. The money had moved through several shell companies. But the final recipient was clear. Judge Alan Whitmore. A man known for his hard stance on crime. A man who had publicly denounced police misconduct while secretly enabling it. David picked up his phone and called Jordan. "We found him," he said. Jordan's grip on the phone tightened. "Then we take him down." The shadow behind the curtain. Meanwhile, inside a high-security federal detention center, Kowalski sat across from an FBI interrogator. He looked calm, almost amused. "You think you won?" Kowalski chuckled, shaking his head. "You're so focused on me that you don't even realize I was just another piece on the board." The agent leaned forward. "Then give us the king." Kowalski smirked. "You wouldn't even know where to start." Then, he sat back, stretching his arms as if he were sitting in a lounge instead of a cell. "And I'll bet you something else." He tilted his head. "The minute you get close to him, he'll see you coming." 2 months had passed. The world kept turning. The headlines had faded, replaced by newer scandals, fresher tragedies. The Brotherhood was fractured, but not destroyed. Jordan Carter had tried to move on. He had gone back to his gym, working with clients who now saw him as something more than just a trainer. Some looked at him with admiration, others with hesitation. Either way, he was no longer invisible. Apollo trotted beside him as they walked through the park one crisp evening. It was quiet, the air heavy with the scent of damp grass. A young police officer approached him hesitantly. "Mr. Carter," he said, shifting awkwardly, I just wanted to say thank you. What you did, it made me rethink a lot of things." Jordan studied the officer's face. Looking for insincerity, he found none. He gave a small nod, then kept walking. Some things could change, maybe. Ethan's judgment. The hearing room was cold and sterile, filled with men and women who had already made up their minds. Ethan Carter stood before them, hands at his sides. He didn't beg for leniency, didn't try to defend himself. "I covered for the wrong people," he said, voice steady. "I protected corruption when I thought I was protecting the system. And I won't make excuses for that." There was a long silence. In the end, they didn't fire him, but they did strip him of his rank. A demotion, a warning, a chance for redemption. When Ethan stepped outside, Jordan was waiting. "You should be pissed at me," Ethan muttered. Jordan crossed his arms. "I was." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "And now?" Jordan shrugged. "Now, I just want to see what you do next." A new threat emerges. David Chen had spent weeks combing through every document, every case tied to the Brotherhood. He had testified before committees, spoken to journalists, pushed for deeper investigations. Late one night, he found an envelope slipped under his office door. No return address, no markings. Inside was a single piece of paper. "If you think this war is over, you're wrong." Attached was a photograph. Jordan, Ethan, David. Someone was still watching. David clenched his jaw. They had cut off the head of the snake, but the body was still moving. The cycle continues. That night, Jordan drove home through empty streets. The hum of the engine the only sound in the quiet. Then, red and blue lights flared in his rearview mirror. He slowed the car, pulling over. His grip tightened on the wheel. A single officer stepped out. Not Kowalski, not anyone he recognized. The officer leaned down, peering through the window. "You can win a battle," he said, voice low, "but you'll never win the war." Then he straightened up, stepped back, and returned to his cruiser. The lights flicked off. Jordan watched him drive away, his heartbeat a steady drum in his ears. How much had really changed? He sat there for a long time, gripping the wheel, staring at the empty road ahead. Then he exhaled, shifted into drive, and kept moving forward. Justice isn't always about winning. It's about refusing to stay silent. Jordan fought not just for himself, but for everyone trapped in a system designed to keep them down. But the real question is, did he truly change anything? Or is the cycle destined to repeat? What do you think? Can corruption ever be fully exposed? Or does it always find a way to survive? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to Covert Truths for more stories that reveal the truth behind the headlines.